Welcome back to another episode of Love, Life, and Legacy, the podcast dedicated to helping you navigate these hypersexualized times of ours. That was my 1973 radio voice. Welcome back, everybody, to this wonderful life that we lead. And today, Benji and I are unpacking how important it is to allocate your attention according to your desires rather than wasting your attention on a trillion other things that are not serving you well. And honestly speaking, we haven't been this passionate. Typically, our podcasts are like 43 minutes, 45 minutes, something in that range. But this one was an hour and 8 minutes because we got fired up. And I think that we unpacked a lot of stuff that was deep in us that we understood but never expressed, especially together. And I think it's going to be extremely helpful because we break down two different formulas that are summarized by the end about how you can absolutely transform yourself into whatever you want. But there is a process. And if you follow this process, you get guaranteed results every time because that's how we're designed as humans. And if you don't follow this process, then you will turn into whatever mishmash kind of hodgepodge inputs you breathe in and take in through social media, and then you'll just feel really not like yourself. You won't feel very comfortable in your own skin whatsoever because you're not co-creating your life with intentionality. So hear about this formula, learn about it, change your life. I think you should listen to this episode in full many times until you inculcate it and change your life. Please welcome myself and Benji talking about attention. Hey, friends.
Hello.
Come on in. Come on in. Yeah, please.
Come on up.
Take off your shoes. Let's go.
Come on in.
Come on in. Let's go.
It's my mom.
We
My mom would always say that. Come on in. Shapai. It's Welsh. Come on in.
Shoppy, what's shoppy?
Shapai.
Like,
Shapai
let's
is
go
like
shop on
hurry up.
Shopee.
Shapai is like hurry up, but it's Welsh. But my whole life I thought it was English, but it's actually Welsh. And at one point I actually said that in like a group or something, and people had no idea what that was talking about. That's happened like 2 or 3 times in my life where I said a word in Welsh, and that's all I knew about it. Like the closet under the stairs is called a cwtch. It's what we call a cwtch in Wales. And then that's just what we call it in our house. And people are like, that's not what that means. I'm like, anyways.
Yeah. I wonder if any parents have been mean enough to experiment on their kids to just teach them all the wrong words for different things so that outside of their house they just look like crazy like calling the dog a car and stuff like that, like not so far off but just like enough off to be like,
Yeah.
what is wrong with this person?
I have to say, Andrew, I had a really fun laugh with my son, Kojin, yet last night because when I say goodbye to him and I close the door in his room, I always try to find a creative way to say I love you because it's boring to say every night like, oh, I love you,
Yeah.
God loves
Yeah.
you. And so I try to find amusing ways to say I love you. And for a long time it was, Kojin, I love you this much, and I put up my fingers and like it's like tiny. This is how much I love you. Um, but he knows he knows it's a joke. It's a joke, so it's funny. And then last night I had a new one, which was, Kojin, I love you more than all the fish in the sky and all the stars in the sea, like that. He was like, you don't love me at all then, because there's no fish in the sky. I'm like, so
He's a clever kid. He
I'm
knows
hoping
he's
he'll grow up thinking that that's the phrase, and he'll say that to his kids. Love you more than all the stars in the ocean.
Yeah, that's your contribution to your lineage. We are today, Benji, going to talk about attention. And I didn't mention it because we corresponded and we had a little bit of a spat over what's more important, time or attention. And instead of continuing it via text, I was like, let's hash it out here because you're passionate about attention and think it's the most valuable resource more than time. My opinion, personally, is that time is the vehicle for attention. You cannot have attention if you don't have time. Hence, being alive permits you to have attention. So attention lives
Yeah.
within time. So then time is more important. But attention is is what makes time relative, which is like when you put your attention on good things, your days fly. And if you put your attention on complaints, they're long, excruciating days. So I would say that time's more important, but attention, I like for a substantial thing that you can't control necessarily as much. And then attention is something that you can control. Would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, because we were talking about it because we did an episode. If y'all haven't checked it out, about time. It's literally called About Time. That was several months ago. We did that episode, and I remember after that episode because the point of that was we were saying time is your most valuable resource, right? And something was going off in me, like for me, like I was relating to my life, and I realized that I think it depends on what stage of life you're in, and how your time and attention is allocated. Because if you are somebody that wastes a lot of time, right, and doesn't know how to use your time, then allocating more of your bandwidth to distribute your time appropriately and in a healthy way is probably more valuable, right? But if you're somebody that has a lot of time and is doing the right things but lacks the attention of where to put the time, because that's kind of how I define attention, is the ability to allocate time in a productive way, in the right way, right? Because we all have, and this is kind of my line of thinking behind it, is that we all have the same amount of time in a day, but everybody allocates that time differently depending on where they focus that attention. And so, in that sense, I feel like it's more important, but also it depends on what stage of life you're in. For me in my life, my attention is my most valuable resource because there's a ton of stuff as we age, as we get older, that's vying for our attention and my attention. And I just have to be better at saying no to more stuff or saying yes to the right stuff, even if it means saying no to things that are really, really good and would be great. I still have to say no to it so that I can say yes to better things. An example of that would be like my pastor, God bless him, keeps asking me to give sermons at church, right? And I have for a long time, but in the last year, I decided that I didn't want to give sermons anymore. We still go to church and attend, but I was realizing whenever I give sermons, it took up so much of my attention, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I was like constantly thinking about it to the point where like this is not something that's really it's really bad to say. It's not worth my attention or my time
Are you
based on
listening to
who.
this, everybody? Sammy or Benji? Sorry, the other Yama. Benji is it officially a sinner? And I would like
Yeah,
that to be logged. I logged. Whoever has logging capabilities, please log that.
I'm only a church goer now, so I don't stand at the pulpit
Please
no more.
strike one down for Satan.
Yeah. So, anyways, my point is that sometimes saying no to things is really hard because it sounds really, really good.
Sure.
But saying no to doing that, even though it's a good thing, allows me to say yes to more important things to me right now in my life, like spending those weekends just focusing on my family and not having my attention split, right? So it's one example, but I would say depends on the time of life and also what you need more of in terms of resources. Um, for some people, money is maybe the most valuable resource, right? If we're honest, it's just like what's needed. Sometimes food is the most valuable resource if you don't have food.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, and
But
also when we
even
say
that,
attention.
so
Mhm. Go ahead.
the Viktor Frankl book, uh, In Search of Meaning for
Man,
Man,
search
or the
for meaning.
meaning of,
Hmm.
yeah. It's essentially attention, right? It's like where, okay, even in the most lowly position that you could possibly imagine yourself, where are you going to put your attention? Are you going to put it on woe is me? And True Father actually talked about this a lot. There's like his autobiography talking about Hungnam prison, but there's also a lot more, if you go deeper into his lectures, a lot more discussion about the true state of what Hungnam was like. And I've actually heard uh like just people who were in the war talking about North Korea during the Korean War and the prison camps. They didn't say
Hmm.
Hungnam specifically, but it was a similar camp where they actually it was a lot of it was just psychological torture, right? Why they feed them so little, why they work them so hard. Part of it was for labor, but they actually didn't need that labor nearly as much as they were just really angry at these people, and it was supposed to be a prison. Like you're supposed to die. And True Father really was clear that where you put your attention is your survival in this situation. If your attention is on
Mm.
focusing on all the negatives, you will die in that extreme of a situation. It's your mind that's keeping you alive at that point, right? And being an early church member, I was like, wanting to test myself. I think a lot of young men, and I don't know if young women are as stupid, but I think a lot of young men want to push the boundaries of what we're capable of with our physical body. So when I joined the church, I was definitely like trying to do 3 hour nights of sleep, and just like pray, always be the first one in the prayer room, last one in the prayer room. Like, I'll show you who's the most faithful, this kind of thing, trying to prove myself. And, at that point, when you go long enough without the required sleep to be a healthy person, you could fall asleep anywhere at any time unless you're not totally, your attention isn't on the task at hand, right? Let's say somebody's talking to you and they're being a little bit boring. You will start to fall asleep if your attention isn't on them because it's so kind of fragile. And it's like a
Mm.
small example of how when we have an abundant set of resources for time, sleep, whatever, it's very easy to waste them and attention too. Oh, I'm not doing anything now, so I'll just scroll my phone. But when you really realize how precious it is, like in those opportunities when, let's say, you have a relative, one of my best friends, his dad just died.
Mm.
Where he puts his time and attention is really crucial at this phase because how much would he pay for an extra 5 minutes with his dad? That's the whole movie Onward was about that, just like spending an extra 5 minutes with your dad that he came back from the dead, this kind of thing. Um, so yeah, True Father, that whole idea of like we don't realize it, but it's actually that serious all the time in a spiritual sense. We won't physically die if we don't stay positive, right? But we will spiritually easily die in this culture if we don't put our attention on the right things. And that's why
Mm.
porn is like such an insidious thing because you're willingly giving it all of your attention. 100% of your focus and attention is on that thing, and what it's giving you back is a broken sense of self, right? Because you've given your most valuable resource to it and it knows it and it knows how to get it. And that's how it's all set up, you know?
Mm. Yeah, I think that focusing on gratitude is a really transformative thing because I think that's essentially how he survived on giving half of his rice away to other prisoners, right? Because it's like you could see that as I only get this amount of rice, but his attitude was like, wow, I get this much rice, which is a completely different perspective of thinking about things.
Yeah.
And it is how he survived. It's just how he survived. Like
He
just
tricked
that.
his brain. He
Yeah.
tricked his brain and he tricked his body. And that's the crazy thing is, well, some may say that's a psychological trick that you do on yourself. But what's crazy is that our body has the physical reserves to follow your beliefs, right? So if you're starving, but you believe you're not, like really believe, like he really believed it. He believed with his whole heart that he was doing this for God and that he had more than enough food, so much that he could give some away. That was his ardent belief. His body
Mm.
compensated. How cool is that? That we have these mechanisms within ourselves to follow our belief. So that's why it's very, if you're focusing on how sick you are, you tend to get a lot sicker, right? Because your body is compensating for your belief. It's preparing, which is the nocebo effect. There's the placebo effect, which is science
Mm.
cannot account for at this point, still to this day. I have a family member who worked in chemical, he would make generic versions of popular drugs for a pharmaceutical company. They hate the placebo effect because you can't make money off that, right? But if
Yeah.
somebody deeply believes that they're taking a pill that's going to save their life, there's always a percentage, and it's a pretty large percentage, that
Mm.
they can get the exact same benefits as described by the pharmaceutical company pill than a nothing pill, just a tic tac, right? But it's
Mhm.
not like a mild belief. It's like a wholehearted belief. Wow, this pill is going to save me, right? Same thing is true, though, to the negative, which is the nocebo effect, which is somebody says, "Oh, you're gonna die." If you really believe that, your body will start to prepare because it's following your belief system, right? And You can actually die, but you can also just get really, really sick unnecessarily because your mind is sick. So that's the important of like the
Interesting.
input of our belief connected to our attention, right? Is like what you're focusing on with your heart. What you're focusing on with your mind is important, but what you focus on with your heart changes your biology. That's the crazy thing.
Mhm.
Like for better or for worse. And so why not use that for the better, right? The North Star goal is that put your attention on who you want to become and believe it with all your heart and watch. Your body will start to compensate for that future. But it's a hard thing to do to get past
Yeah.
the prefrontal cortex that says, I don't know about this. That sounds a little bit sketchy. And you're like, shut up, brain. We're gonna
Mm.
believe, man. That's where belief and logic are at odds. And you gotta choose. Do you want to believe beyond all odds?
Yeah.
And that's like, Michael Jordan, we were just talking about him. It's religion, but it's also just really practical. Like anybody, Elon Musk is a great example of like putting every last cent of his own fortune into three companies that are destined to fail, but he knows that they could help. And so he makes three companies that are unbelievably successful because of his belief.
How would you define attention? What we give our attention to?
Focus, I would say focus, bandwidth, focus and bandwidth. And it's again, it's through your mind because in our slides, Benji, the whole idea of like who owns, there's this slide in the, I think, purity talk, which is who owns your eyes,
Hmm.
who owns your, I guess, mouth. And one of them is who owns your attention. And for the most part, most of us give away at least 30% of our days worth of attention to stuff that doesn't matter. Some people almost 100% of their attention. So they're focusing on that person that they hate. That's thinking about it and feeling it. Focusing on how much you hate yourself. How many people, Benji, are stuck in shame? What is shame? It's putting all of your attention on how much you suck
Mm.
until you feel it and until that feeling just feels realer than anything. And so you're like, well, if I feel this way, it must be true. And that's just because you're putting your attention on all of your negative attributes and you've grown it. So I would say, yeah, focus, but also bandwidth, because it's like the focus of your mind is really powerful and important, but it's when your heart believes it that it starts to become dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah,
What would you
bandwidth.
say?
I can relate a lot with that, right? Because I think it's helpful for people that are like, well, I want to give my attention to preparing for matching blessing marriage, but very little of my time is actually allocated to that because I'm busy with school, with work, with family obligations, right? And so people are like, well, I want to give more of my attention and time to things that are important to me, but I don't, right? And this is typical example, especially for us dads. Like we have the heart, like I want to do generally, not everyone. Like I want to do more with my kids and for my kids,
Yeah.
but then the schedule itself is like just busy. So for me, I notice my attention based on logically like when I have the extra headspace when I'm not doing anything, like when I'm on the toilet, when I'm going to sleep at night, when I wake up first thing in the morning, when I'm not actually physically doing something, what am I thinking about? And to
Yeah.
me that's the most indicative thing of what my attention is on right now in this stage of my life, right? So if I first wake up in the morning and I think, well, I feel terrible or anything like that or shame or whatever, then I know that my priority today is me and like how I'm feeling, right? But if I wake up and it's like, okay, like let's make today a great day for my family. On those
Yeah.
days, I'm like, I feel good because I know that my attention is aligned correctly and adequately with my priority in my life. And that's when I
It's
feel at
such,
peace, you know?
yeah. And every week I have a new thing of who we are, high noon, but we're the intentionality people, right? In many ways, because
Okay.
it's like where you put your attention and intentionality. It's like it's really all about, it's crazy because most people are living very unconsciously and it's such a waste. It's such a waste of a day and a week and a month and a life to live unconsciously. And when you start to wake up to how unconscious you are about how you use your phone. I was talking to somebody the other day and I want to do an episode about this, about his room, about his bedroom. And it's like, what's the purpose of your bedroom? And he's never thought about it. His bedroom is like this all-purpose room where he eats there sometimes. He sleeps there. He zones out there on his phone a lot. So it's got this weird kind of consortium of energies. When he's never really considered what's the purpose of his phone? What's
Mm,
the purpose of his bedroom? And when you start thinking on that level of course I'm not getting the most out of something that I've never thought about. What is the most out of I can get out of this thing? In a very practical way, you realize, oh my God, I've been asleep most of my life. That's a scary notion, right? Like most people, if you were to ask adults, grown adults, what's the purpose of your phone? They might, if they're clever, try to give you a nice answer, and then you're like, show me like the percentage of different apps that you're on. It's all
mm,
over the place because people, it's really, if they're honest, it's to be unintentionally wandering around, which is why you feel weird about your relationship with your phone. Instead of being like, I have this thing for these 5 reasons and I only use them for these reasons and I dominate it, that's when you have a healthy relationship with your phone. Even like when to carry your phone and when to not. I've been experimenting with that a
mm,
lot over the past half year. And it's great because a lot of times I'm going to the park, don't need my phone because I want to be present. And sometimes I miss out on pictures. But what I don't do is I don't whip out my phone when I'm supposed to be giving my kids attention. And I
mm,
wanted to mention this is like spouses and children, they don't want your physical presence nearly as much as they want your attention, right? One of the loneliest feelings in the world is to be physically near somebody, but to feel emotionally distant from that person. It's the weirdest feeling because you're like, I should feel grateful, but I feel nothing or I feel negative. And it's because there's an emotional, ethereal like distance. There's like an invisible distance between you. But when somebody gives you their full, undivided attention, it makes you feel like the most important person in the world. And that's the gift
mm.
that we can give other people when we give them our attention. But like in our talks, you can't give what you don't have. And most people have no control over their attention. Their minds are these little monkeys that jump around, say, look at this. What about this? Oh, do you remember that thing when you were 2 years old? Oh, what's your favorite gummy bear? Oh, I love gummy bears. Oh, gummy. And then you're like, oh, you have no control. It's madness. So you're trying to talk to them and they're like,
I
uh-huh,
think we think of
uh-huh.
different things, Andrew, you and I.
I was just riffing. Um, but when you look at somebody's eyes, they could be looking you in the eye, but you know that they're not there. Their attention isn't on you, it's somewhere else. It's an infuriating feeling because you're like, we're here, you're looking at me, you say you want to listen to me, but you're not. And I can see it in your eyes. It's like we're wasting our time here, right? But conversely, when they're all in and listening to you, it's like it fills you up. We're always trying to dig at what is connection. That's
Yeah.
a great thing is when somebody's attention is on you and when your attention is on somebody. That is a complete feeling of like we are transacting in a very deep, meaningful way. And it's
Mm,
because we're putting our attention on each other. But like I was starting out with, you cannot give your attention to somebody if you don't know how to shut out the other distractions and focus on one thing at a time. And your phone is a huge part of why you can't do that in this day and age. Why our attention span. Look at that. It's the word attention and span. How's your attention span, Benji? Have you noticed it change over the years as the internet has evolved?
mm. Well, I can see the greatest contrast this year because it's July and I haven't used social media or YouTube this year. Unless I specifically look like earlier you asked me to look up something. What was it? Banana baseball, something like that.
Yeah, the Savannah bananas, man.
Savannah bananas. Okay. So how I use YouTube is I go to Google and I search in the Google search for videos. You can watch any video directly in Google without going to YouTube. So that's my relationship with it. The word of the day: attention, intentional attention. And so
Yeah.
I would, just because I've noticed this year, I have better attention span, because I know how to allocate my bandwidth, so to speak, better.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't feel mindless on my attention as much. I mean, it's still work in progress. I still do wake up some days just not with the right frame of mind, and I know that my attention is not there. Like, to be honest, or sometimes I notice when I'm driving, I listen to like I know where my attention is based on what I'm listening to, right? And so if I'm listening to music, that means if I want to listen to music, it means I'm in a good space. Like I'm really like enjoying life. I'm being present. That's how I feel, right? That's how I interpret it. If I'm listening to, I mean, honestly, like if I'm listening to podcasts, podcasts are not bad. We're making a podcast right now, but for me, like the podcasts I listen to are like really nerdy business kind of podcasts about like stuff like that. That's like where my mind goes, and I notice like that's not it's not bad. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's indicative that I could be listening to like parenting stuff, like books I've bought about parenting that I haven't finished, stuff like that, you know.
Sure.
So yeah, I've seen it just a shift, the biggest shift this year, just since I decided like I don't want anything to do with media anymore, and it's been healthy, I think, for the most part.
I want to introduce you, everybody, to our new marketing guy who's in control of our media. Just as an ironic twist in High Noon's
Yes.
department.
Well,
That
let's
wasn't a
put it
joke. Benji is actually our marketing guy.
yeah,
Yeah,
let's put it this way. I think that it is useful to be on platforms as a consumer to understand how things work, but I feel
sure.
like it's more useful to study them. And I think that most people don't study them when they're consuming them, right?
Yeah.
And so the way that I'm going to use media, especially like Instagram and YouTube, is to be a student, learner of those platforms rather than a consumer.
Yeah, I love
Because
it.
I have been. I mean, I have been a consumer for, I mean, a decade of that stuff. And it's not that I don't. I still go to Instagram if somebody shares something with me or if I need to look up something. But it's more on my terms and my rules rather than being fed an algorithm that is just trying to upset me because that's basically what my algorithm tries to do to me.
Always fighting with your
It's just
algorithm.
trying to make me angry about something. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's being intentional with your attention. That's the name of the game, everybody. Is it's the spice of life, right? Um, Especially if you're younger, you're not in full control of your schedule. There are certain obligations you have. If you live at home, then you gotta do stuff sometimes that your parents want you to do that you don't want to do. It's just part of the deal. If you're even blessed and you have somebody else in your life, then for sure you don't have full autonomy of your time, nor should you because you're part of a team now. So it's like not just what you want to do, it's what your spouse wants you to do or what your couple needs to do, right? But first of all, it's like being intentional with all of your thoughts and emotions. This is the crazy part that, again, most people don't even have an awareness that they can control is their emotions. What are you focusing on? Sure, anger is going to pop up every once in a while, but do you want to hold on to it? I play this game with my kids all the time. If they're standing there, I'm like, hey, why are you holding on to this anger? If they're super angry, I'm like, look at your hands right now. You have angry hands. You have an angry eyebrow. Like
Mhm.
you are holding on. Do you want to hold on to it? And usually I have to ask that question 3 to 5 times before they answer because their ego is so much like, back off, Jack. Right. But eventually they're like, no, I don't want to hold on to it. So it's like, okay, so what can we do? Do you need to go for a walk? Do you need to just go punch a pillow? Do you need to do some push ups? Do you need to hug me? Like, what do you need in order to let go? But you can choose the emotions that you focus on. And what you focus on grows. It's like a bumper sticker we've all read, but something that very few people practice day to day, which is like what you focus on, even emotionally, is what grows. So if you want to grow the good in your life, then you have to focus on that. And for you, for all of you guys out there and gals who are stuck in a place where we talk to people, Benji and I, every day, every single day of of our
Mhm.
lives.
Of
We're
our
talking to
miserably
people
awesome
who,
lives.
no, I love it. We're honored to uh, to hear from these people, but it's really hard when you're going through the process of becoming your channel Guk self to believe that that's even possible, right? But it becomes more possible the more attention you put on the possibility that it is possible. Like, what if? What if I could actually be happy? What if I could actually have an amazing blessing? What if I could be the type of person who's super reliable? That what if is like you start pouring your energy on that. Well, start experimenting, start creating goals for yourself, life goals for yourself that allow you to practice being that person. And the more that you get positive feedback of like, wow, I can wake up early. I thought I was not a morning person, but it wasn't that bad, right? And then all of a
Mm,
sudden you're proving to yourself that it is possible. It's this positive feedback loop that makes you feel like, wow, maybe it's possible for me to be a happy, healthy person. And it's not something you can do with your mind alone. That's what's missing from a lot of these kind of motivational areas of the internet is like they're just like just convince yourself and it's like kind of like a mind trick, but your heart really has to believe. That's the key aspect of the placebo and nocebo effect is if you believe it with your heart, and then your heart unlocks all these chemicals neurologically, pharmacologically, like in your body you have like, that's the crazy part about drugs is they don't give you these chemicals. They just release the chemicals that are already in your body, right? There's some really reckless guru out there who I was listening to, and he was like, everybody should do mushrooms. He's an
mm,
idiot. And that's a very reckless thing to do because there's a lot of severe consequences, especially if you're doing it before your brain is fully
mm.
developed. But
Yeah.
you can get the same effects, even like psychedelic stuff. You don't need drugs. You can have visions through meditation. There's breathing exercises that release DMT that allow you to, you don't need anything external. It all exists within you. It's just your attention, is my point. How you use your attention.
Hey, just a quick interruption to tell you about the 40-day High Noon Challenge. If you're trying to find a way to start living a high noon life today with no shadows and create a radiant blessing, then this simple challenge is for you. We will send you daily lessons from our team that will keep you motivated on your journey. It's totally free, guys, and you'll get constant content directly to you. Just sign up today at highnoon.org/challenge. That is highnoon.org/challenge. All right, back to the show.
And that means starting with your mind, what you're thinking about, and then thinking about it enough until where you start believing it with your heart. And that's when things start changing. But sometimes you have to think something so many times before you actually believe it. You have to find many different ways of thinking about something before you actually believe that it's possible. But when you do, that's when the momentum starts taking place. And so your attention to me, Benji, it seems like is a two-part process. It's choosing what you want to think about and who you want to be. That's mind, and then practicing that until your heart catches up. And your heart will likely take a little bit of time to catch up because it's been hurt and it wants to protect itself, right? So it doesn't want to just believe in everything that you think because that's actually smart. Because then every time you think I suck, then that so it is, right? So
Mm.
there's a latency between what you think in your mind and what you believe in your heart. But if you have enough intentionality and you put your attention on what you want to believe enough, your heart will eventually come around. That's what makes redemption possible for anybody. That's what we hate hearing. I don't want to get into details, but there are corners of even our own movement where they're still teaching that if you fall in any way, even if you masturbate or anything like that, then you're irredeemable and you're just going to hell. That is one of the most upsetting things in the world because you're starting with the emotion of rejection. And if somebody believes that, okay, I'm going to hell, how do you think they're going to live? If that's their deep held belief in their heart that they're worthless, they're going to do things that a worthless person would do. That's how you start making some very regretful decisions in your life. So, yeah, it's a two-parter. Guys and gals, choose your thoughts carefully, especially what you repeat enough, because eventually your heart will believe it. And that's when you start to become that person. And you would want to do that in an intentional way, not an unintentional way. And most of us do live a portion of our lives very unintentionally. And there's some dire consequences.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of that,
Yeah, well,
Benji?
I mean, it starts innocently, I would say, when people are busy with school, which is most people from the age of 5 until 20, 21, right? And then they make up reasons why they can't do something because I don't have time. And that's a literal constraint where you don't have enough time in the day because you're at school all day and then you have homework, right? And so, but I think attention is a helpful perspective because it adds in the element of this is not what you do with your time isn't always your number one priority in your life. And so another way of saying that is like your North Star could be something completely unrelated to what you spend your time on. And this is why we can have situations like parents, right, who have young kids who are working every day, all day, but their attention is with their love and their heart is with their kids, even though they might not spend time with them. And that's what a good parent is. It's like my heart and my attention, my number one priority is not my work, even though that's where I spend most of my time, which is unfortunate. But my attention, the bandwidth, the heart space, and their mental real estate is all with my kids. That's what matters. And when you talk with parents like that, you can see it in them. They're like, this is what I do for work, but I really just want to love God, love my family, be part of my community, and love my church, right? That's what they really want to do. And then on the flip side of that, the unfortunate thing is that it starts with like, oh, I don't have time to focus on my North Star because I'm in school or I'm working. Therefore, none of my attention is getting allocated to things that matter, like preparing for the blessing, like raising my children. And then before they know it, what happens is they bring that habit with them of not knowing how to allocate attention from teenagehood to adulthood to having a family to their kids growing up. And before they know it, their kids are adults. That's the typical example. And before they know it, they're like, oh man, you used to be a kid. What happened? They didn't get the attention, right? That's what happens is they became a teenager and they're like, oh, you grew so fast. It's because you weren't paying attention. And so that's the extreme example, but it's extreme, but it's not uncommon in the sense that it happens so much. But it really starts with a habit of, even though we're busy, like no one's not busy. I mean, most people are not busy. Most people are busy, like time wise. But
That
we
was like a
all
triple
have
negative. Nobody's
we all,
not never busy.
yes, nobody's ever not busy, but we all have the ability to allocate our bandwidth, our attention in other ways, in other words, to the things that really matter for us. And that's why the equation for me is, what's your priority in life? I would say name two priorities, number one, number two. And are those priorities getting the adequate amount of attention for you? Time, yes, as much as possible. But since time is a finite resource, is at least getting the attention, which is when you're driving, when you're listening to podcasts, when you're waking up in the morning, going to sleep at night, when you're talking to people in your life, people are checking in with you. How are you doing? Is the first thing you talk about work and school, or the first thing you talk about is your internal stuff, the blessing, the matching process, right? Your children. And so for me, it's like when I'm talking with people or sharing or we're doing our check-ins, I try to, as much as possible, not talk about work, because that means my headspace is consumed by work and not really what I think I want my number one priority in my life right now to be, which is just to raise these kids in a good environment. Right?
You're fired.
Everyone's like, that was so deep, Benji. Thank you. You're fired. And Andrew comes in with his
You're
buzzkill.
fired. No, it was deep, Benji. You're a deep, deep soul. God bless your deep soul. I think, Benji, you are exactly right. And when your attention's been wasted, you feel like you've been robbed. So let's imagine somebody who wasted an entire year because their attention was on the wrong stuff during school. You missed the whole point of being in school, and then what you're left with is regret. And those parents in those situations that missed out on their kids' childhood, filled with regret. But when you're putting your attention on the right things, you don't have that regret because you were intentional in it, and you see the fruits of your labor of giving your attention, because now your kids trust you more, right? Your kids love you more. You feel closer to them because you're paying attention to them. And we have these instincts and these inclinations that are only available to us when we're paying attention, right? You can catch things about your kids very early before they're a problem by observing them. Yeah. So for an example, our kids have been in soccer out here in Mongolia, which is hilarious because nobody speaks English. So they're just kind of like trying to figure out what's going on most of the time. And I haven't been able to go because it's usually during the day, or it's all weird times. Everything's weird out here in that respect, where they find out like the day before what time. It could be at 10 in the morning, like they have one in 30 minutes, but last night it was at 6 o'clock in the evening. Like it's anyway. So, but yesterday was the first time that I got to go and see them, right? And I was really just sitting with my wife, and I think when she takes them or her sisters take them, they just kind of sit down and passively kind of watch and be like, oh yeah, the kids are having fun. I was watching them and giving them all my attention. It was my older son and my middle son playing two different games, one with the little kids, one with the bigger kids. And I saw so much stuff that I was like, oh my God. They don't know anything about this game. Like they are lost out there. They are like one of them looks so scared of the ball. It's like, oh man, I had no idea how much I need to give attention to this because I didn't know where they were at. So I needed
Mm.
to not only like be there physically, I need to really observe what's going on. And I could see their characters coming out in this game. And so I on the way back home last night, I was like, okay, guys, we need to go all in. We're gonna get them equipment, we're gonna get some soccer balls, and we're gonna start practicing because I know how to help them based on where they're at. But that's only because like my wife would never notice because most of the time she was not. Actually, at some point I had to run back to her because I thought she was being attacked by a stray dog because there's a lot of stray dogs trying to eat her watermelon.
Mm.
So, but she was in another world because it's not her sport. She doesn't know that much about sports, whatever. But I was like, I know sports and I know my kids, and I put those two things together and I gave them my full attention and I brought up a lot of stuff. I felt really like, oh my God, I've failed in terms of teaching them about this game, not all
Mm.
this stuff. But it was a revelation because I could also sit with that and be like, well, this is just the starting point and I can work with them. It gives us a challenge to work on together. And that's something that I really wanted to do is like some disciplined framework of showing them how to break through a very uncomfortable feeling, right? And all of that's only possible because of attention. That moment sponsored by attention.
Nice.
And I wanted to mention one last phenomenon, which is something that's, again, you've probably heard of many times, but never really sat with, which is the reticular activating system. And that's something that is kind of like what you're putting your attention on is what you notice unconsciously because it's on your mind. It's like stuck to your mind. So you see it more. So an
Mm.
example that is always used is like a car. Out here, there are please look up on Google, everybody, furgons. You can Russian furgon vans. They say Pergon and furgon, but I think in Google, it's Furgon. They're the coolest vans ever. And they only exist in Russia and Mongolia. And we fell in love with them. And the second we noticed how cool they are, we started seeing them everywhere. They were
Mm.
always everywhere. We just didn't notice them until we noticed them. And we
Mhm.
always saw them. And okay, stupid example, a car. But think about this in terms of your wife, Benji. You know this. Oh, my wife is like this. And then you notice it all the time. She always does this. That's why people say that. Oh, you always do this because that's what you're focusing on. That's where your attention is on somebody's fallen nature. And they
Mm.
say, I've heard this in many lectures, the person who's an expert in other people's fallen nature is struggling. you are you are embodying fallen nature when that's all you can see, right?
Mm.
Because that's what you've
Mhm.
trained yourself. But imagine being the type of person that I want to see the good in people and you feel it. You practice that. I want to be the type of person that sees the good and brings that out in people when I'm in their presence. Then when you're around them, you're consciously and unconsciously observing all the good in that person and you're mentioning it to them and they're feeling great because you're like, "Hey, did you ever notice I know, you're such a caring person. You really and you're feeding them with this beauty and it's like, well, I didn't know. I didn't know I was like that, right? And then all of a sudden you're observing stuff that maybe even they haven't seen. And it's because that's where your attention is at. So again, when you have this desire, either consciously or unconsciously, to want something or need something, you will notice it a lot more. That's why it's very important to be intentional about what you're going after.
Mm.
Because I also know some guys specifically, who report to me and they're like, they really notice when girls are hitting on them, right? Or flirting with them. And that it really triggers something like, oh, I feel really good right now, right? Um, because that's kind of what they've trained themselves to want and to need, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of brings to mind the dichotomy between gratitude and entitlement, right? Like if you focus on the entitlement, which is I don't have enough, I need more, and then the
Yeah.
opposite end of that is I have so much, I want to give, which
Yeah.
is in the same situation, like back to True Father's example, right? In the same situation, completely changes your emotional state depending on how you view that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's super powerful stuff, right? I mean, I've done this a lot just recently where I was asking myself, like, am I being grateful or entitled right now in this particular situation? And as
Yeah.
soon as like I'm pretty entitled, then it's like, oh, if this could be 10 times worse or 100 times worse, and it's not that. So this is pretty amazing, actually, you know?
Yeah.
But also, there's a really interesting dichotomy happening between gratitude and experiencing God.
Yeah.
And I actually want to get into this someday. Araceli and I were having a kind of a debate about this point because which comes first? Is it's I've noticed and I've seen in others, it's easier to be grateful if you experience God in your life. If you've experienced sufficient amount of God's love and care, it's easier to be
Sure.
grateful. But also, it's easy to experience God when you have a heart of gratitude, you know? And so it's kind of a sneaky way to experience either or is like, if I want to experience more God in my life, just focus on gratitude as a gateway to open up that gate to experiencing more love and acceptance in God, essentially. Because the premise of gratitude, the entire kind of foundation and backbone of gratitude is I have so much. Like there's so
Yeah.
much. I'm receiving so much from something, from somewhere. And so in that state, it's like there must be a God. But when we're feeling entitled, like everything's terrible, my life is garbage, I'm negative, it is nearly impossible, almost impossible to experience God because all we're saying is life's not good enough. Like there's nothing out there that has
Yeah.
me giving me attention. And so therefore there must not be a God. And I think subconsciously we feel that. But I also know that people that experience a lot of God in their lives are really good relationships with their parents, siblings,
Oh
family.
man.
It's easy to experience gratitude because it's like life's good,
That's
you know?
one of the greatest lies in our social media laden culture is the pursuit of money will bring you happiness. But I'm telling you, especially Benji, you and I both lived in New York for a while, and you meet these janitors in these buildings who are like, "Hey, how you doing?" And you're like, "Hey, I'm great." And they're like, "It's a great day." And you're like, "Yes, it is." And they're like, "God bless you." And they're like, "No, no, God bless you." And they're so like on fire, and they're janitors or they're in these like very humble positions, and they're so filled up with life. Tell
Mm,
me that you'd rather be a billionaire stuck in a palace of made of ice and like fear rather than be just that person who's completely filled with the good juices of life. And of course, you don't have to pick one or the other, but what is more important at the end of the
mm,
day? And so, absolutely, yeah, those people who are really filled up with God, that was, again, when I joined the church, I didn't know anything about God. And I was like, I don't get it. I didn't know how to pray. I still remember the first prayer that my spiritual mom did with me. I was like, and then she asked me to pray. And I said, well, who am I talking to? Like, what am I doing here? Like, do I just say it out loud and there's somebody there? Or like, I didn't get it. But they showed me the
mm,
video of that movie, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, about St. Francis of Assisi. And there's a moment where he converts. He has this conversion experience. And then you just see him and he looks like he's high out of his mind. And he's going through this kind of meadow filled with these beautiful flowers, and he's just looking at a flower and crying and being like, oh, oh. He's just feeling God so intensely that he looks like he's just losing his mind. And I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. Right. And then, cut to about 6 months later after really devoting myself to, okay, I want to figure this out. What is this God thing? Well, how do I pray? I'm going to pray as hard as I can to see if this is real. Like really devoting myself to the what ifs and the hows. And then that's me all day, every day. It's just like, I just crying all the time, feeling God's love so much that I can't even function
mm,
sometimes. Like just being so laden, dripping with God's love. And it was on the back of putting my intention with not chasing after God's love, but pursuing with great intentionality. What is this thing that I hear about and how real is it? And like opening the door for it to occur, right? And that's the case with all this stuff that we're trying to, I guess, persuade you all. If you're single, you have no idea the other side of having a child. It's the most profound, meaningful. There are all these people, secular people, who are becoming much more spiritual because they become parents. Russell Brand is a great example of that. He was just a drug addict, sex addict, all these things, and he just became a Catholic like a couple months ago. And a huge gateway for him to go from just being a rabid drug addict, sex addict to not was committing to a person and getting married and then having children. It's this definitive moment, and it's worth every amount of effort, right? But it requires you to put your attention on who do you want to be. And if you want that, and that's who we're really going after, right, Benji? We're going to do an entire episode of who is our prime candidate out there so that you can know that if it is you, that we are going to really help the crap out of you, literally help the gunk out of you.
All the high
uh,
noon fiber and probiotics you
yeah,
can imagine.
you're going to be just flying. But those people who are really wanting the blessing, those people who really want a healthy family, a radiant blessing and a radiant family, that's absolutely beckoning. It's at your door. You just have to put your attention on believing that that's possible with your mind, practicing being a radiant person, and just watch as life unfolds. And I just have one story because it's very recent. And I talked to one of my guys, okay? And he just had a shift in his life take place where he was really struggling. He really wanted to stop watching porn. He had already done it in the past, but he fell back into it and he wanted out. And he was trying, he was efforting, but nothing was really changing. And then 2 weeks ago, everything shifted and he stopped wanting to even watch porn. And I was like, whoa, 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 let's stop right there and figure out what happened. You know what he said? He said, 2 weeks ago, I talked to my wife. I told her everything. I told her about all my struggles, and it really hurt her. It took her a little while, a couple days, to really process the fact that her husband had been doing this stuff again, right? But she's a mature, beautiful, loving, godly woman who could forgive him, showed him God's grace, and that reminded him that he's a lovable person. But what was the process there? It was honesty was the gateway to receiving God's grace, right? But it was his attention, putting his attention on his marriage. Man, I'm making my marriage struggle right now. I want it to be better. And it's gathering up the courage to tell somebody, to take out your heart and say, look, these are my mistakes. You can hurt me or you can love me. And it's in that moment, his wife was brave enough to love him, even when he was being externally somewhat unlovable, right? But she cultivated all the attention of loving him, loved him, and then since then they've been flying, right?
Yeah.
So if you put your attention on becoming the Chanoguk version of yourself, you will see opportunities open up all over the place for you to grow, for you to forgive, for you to love yourself, love other people, to reconcile things with God. All things are possible if that's where you put your attention. And if you believe with your heart that all things are possible. But you cannot go from not believing to believing without some sort of a process. And that's repetition of belief in your mind until your heart follows. And it will follow. It just has to trust that you're not going to trick it again. Because we have. We've all tricked our hearts and hurt it many times. Right? Every time we've given our heart, like in a crush or something like that, every time we've betrayed ourselves and gone against our conscience, we've hurt our hearts. And so our hearts are a little bit weary. They're a little bit cautious. And so we have to build trust with our hearts. And when you do that, you will be able to put your attention on the things that matter and change how you experience life itself.
I want to highlight that story for a few reasons. Number one, the grace part in marriage is real. The ability to practice the five high noon virtues in marriage is real, and it's probably the best indicator that somebody is worth marrying if they're able to practice. Not be perfect at, but practice. But that grace goes both ways, right? For men, for
Yeah.
women, for women, for men. But also highlighting the fact that the wife in that situation, it's tempting to think that I have to be able to give grace automatically perfectly all the time. Otherwise, I'm a
Sure.
bad husband, bad wife, I'm a bad spouse. But what's usually happens in that situation is that one of the spouses has to decide when it counts that they're going to choose to practice love and grace, right? And it's helpful to think of it like that because it's not like, oh, am I loving enough to be in a relationship? It's like when it counts, are you going to make the choice to learn how to love, to learn how to give grace, even though it's hard and it's hurtful, you know? So I think that just helps, that perspective helps people feel a little liberated and peace of mind, to feel like I don't have to have all these traits perfect, like honesty and integrity. But
Yeah.
those traits, courage, for example, it's more about when it counts, when you're feeling fearful, when you have a chance to be honest, are you going to do it? It's an action more than it is a trait that we practice or have or don't have, right?
Yeah. And again, it's a belief that you can do it. There's so many, like, again, I'm working with my kids and one of them is particularly fearful and he says I can't do it. I was like, "Oh, come on. Absolutely you can. It's just that's what you really believe right now, so we'll work on that, right?"
Mm.
But it's the same thing with I can't go to the blessing, right? I'm not
Mm-hmm.
worthy of the blessing. I can't tell this person who I really am because then they won't
Oh
love
yeah.
me. These are deeply held beliefs that you've repeated in your mind. You're like, if they find out, they're gonna hate me, and then your heart is freaking out because you're telling it to freak out, right? You are telling it with your mind. So in order to change that, you have to practice, yeah, these five high noon virtues, which is honesty takes a crap load, a metric crap ton of courage to reveal yourself because you risk having that person make fun
Yeah.
of you, scorn you, reject you. And it's so painful if they do, but it's actually the only way to ever be truly loved by another person. And for God to step in that relationship is by being honest. It's the whole part of the principle of like God risked everything, Heavenly Parent risked everything to have these children who could be jerks or to be tremendously loving people. And we do that as parents. You have kids, you don't know how this is going to pan out, right? No matter how many books you read, you'd never know how your kids are going to pan out. And it can be hurtful when they go in some weird directions. But that's what love is. You can only experience it if you're willing to lose it, right? And that's the difficult part of love, but it's actually the most rewarding part. And that's why Benji is absolutely correct. The likelihood of you getting through difficult times in your life is exponentially greater if you are a person who's been practicing the high noon virtues and if you're with somebody else who's also been practicing the high noon virtues, because that makes you more resilient when tough times come and it allows you to get through pretty much anything. And that's been my experience with my wife, Benji. Like
Mm.
we've had very difficult, not just moments, but years when most people would quit, right? Because it makes no logical sense. Because we're told, oh, this isn't working out. I don't feel love in this relationship. So I feel like we should end it, right?
She's not
That's
holding
what
my
we're told.
space anymore.
Yeah. You're not honoring my soul right now. So you can go to hell, right? No, we like, okay, this isn't working. How do we make it work? That's the difference between an owner and a renter. A fundamental shift that needs to take place in your life, if you ever want any amount of happiness that you can keep and rely on, is okay, how do I make this work? How do I restore this? How do I fix this? There's always a pathway back. Look at the divine principle. That's the entire purpose of the divine principle, is that it's humanity's pathway back to God. How we left and how we've been trying to get back and how we get the rest of the way. We're at like the 95-yard line for any football fans out there. But the 5%, the last 5% is actually just believing that it's possible and living like a person who could deserve this love, and you will get to the end zone. God, I hate sports analogies so
There you
much.
go.
I'm
Sports.
sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize on behalf of humanity for using a football analogy on a podcast.
I think we should talk about labels. I like this idea because you were talking about the things we label ourselves, because it's a very helpful or unhelpful, destructive naming
Yeah.
convention. It's like, I am this. And it drives me crazy actually, because as soon as you label yourself as something, then you essentially inherit that identity for your rest of your life. Like
Yeah.
this one drives me crazy is people say, I am an addict. And it's
Yeah.
true, I know, but I've never seen someone actually benefit from saying I am an addict. Because imagine waking up every morning, going to a group of circle of other guys or dudes and saying, hi, my name is so and so, and I am an addict. What that does to you psychologically is crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I just say, well, you are a man that is in pain and has an addiction. Like, can we just say that? You're a son of
Yeah.
God that has a dependency. That's actually more accurate what's going. Anyways, so naming conventions, labeling ourselves, that kind of stuff. So as soon as I hear this stuff, like I am this way, I'm just like I don't know if that's helpful, right?
No, it's definitely not. It's reassuring a belief. Again, when you say something enough and then you start to believe it with your heart, then you are it. Hilda Weeman, I remember her distinctly back in 2016 saying to me that that whole idea of Alcoholics Anonymous, like it was fantastic for the time. It's over 100 years old. It was the kind of pre-Chanuguk era version of recovery, where it very helpful for the time, but not powerful enough for this era. This era is about identifying yourself as a child of God, first and foremost, who has had moments where you've separated and that there's emotional reasons why, and perhaps you were addicted to something for a time, but that doesn't define you at all. And so it's actually very much counterintuitive, and it's destructive to constantly reaffirm an identity that isn't, first and foremost, that you're a child of God. Because that's the whole, listen, everybody, if you don't believe me, consult the family pledge. Look at it. Look at it again and see what it is. It asserts the fact that you are an owner of Chanuguk. And as an owner of Chanuguk, you will live like this. That's the whole thing. It's like, people say brainwashing. Yeah, that's what it is. It's exactly the process of convincing yourself in your mind, this is who I am, and until your heart catches up. That's why saying the family pledge doesn't mean that much unless you say it with your heart. But it's the more that I really think about that point, the more I can see abundantly that nobody's there yet in terms of a standard. So it could feel hypocritical as an owner of Chanuguk, right? But it's allowing yourself to envision as a child of God. Supplant it, just for the sake of this discussion, as a child of God, I will live like this. That's what the family pledge is supposed to be. And when you do like that, that's Benji. Remember, last Sunday I started a 21-day condition, and the first point of I'm working on a few things. One is that I love meeting new people, because I do when I do, but most of the time I tell myself that I'm an introvert and I just need space by myself. And so when I go out into the world, I'm not looking for interaction. I'm just looking to stay in my head, because that's what I've prioritized over the years, because I'm always in foreign lands. It's really frustrating to speak in broken English, or through Google Translate has been my savior for the past, many years. But when I changed it to, no, I love meeting new people, and I have to say it actively in my head throughout the day. Because if I walk into, let's say, a grocery store, let's say any public space, my old self wants to say, I'm an introvert, just keep your head down, focus on why you're there, don't get distracted. But my new identity that I'm working on, inculcating, that I love meeting new people, means that I have to look people in the eyes, and I'm working on smiling sincerely, and it's really hard. I realize that my default, like, hey, how's it going, smile to a stranger, kind of looks like I just stepped on a rock or something like that. It's like I'm somewhat in pain. I'm kind of like, And that's just been my default as somebody who identifies as an introvert, right? So I'm progressively re-identifying as somebody who loves meeting new people, because that's who I want to be. It's part of my vision for myself, because I'm happier when I do that. And I'm connected to the world around me, which is much healthier. So yeah, to say like I'm shy, no. You're acting like a shy person.
You have shy tendencies.
You have shy, yeah.
That's
which
what I
means,
like.
yeah.
I
Go.
mean, I think people don't believe this, but Andrew and I are probably have more introverted tendencies than a lot of the people listening to this.
Yeah.
But it's true. I can relate 100% to what you're saying. Like, just want to be out and alone and not look at anybody. And I feel really uncomfortable when I'm walking past people on the path, and there's like someone over there. I'm like, oh man, how am I going to greet this person? Like, do I give them a head nod? Like, I'm thinking about all this stuff. Like, do I smile?
In your head.
Do I just go past them? Are they friendly?
Yeah.
Like, all this stuff I'm thinking about. It's like,
Yeah.
exhausting.
It's a macho culture out here. So when I smile at a dude and they look at me like they're going to body slam me, and now I'm stuck in my head, I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say hi to these people. That's just all in my head, because I'm thinking about me in this situation, not them. This is the thing, right? But I wanted to note that, like, if it's a really deeply held belief that you have, actually it's physically painful to change deeply held beliefs. And two such instances in my life were, one, going from the shyest kid that I know who never says anything in public to becoming a public speaker. I did it by way of comedy, which meant that it was an excruciating, every time I heard my name and it was my turn to, if I was doing stand up and I was being called up, the walk from where I was sitting to that microphone was the most absolutely conventionally painful. Like I had to take one, like just every step you can get there. And it was just about getting to that microphone. After I got the microphone, everything was okay. But like walking, it was like me transforming my internal nature was physically painful. It was excruciating. I was filled with like cold sweats, so many voices saying, you can't, you can't, you can't. And what am I doing? I'm trimming the weeds of all these like false beliefs. And it manifested in pain. It was actually painful. The second thing was changing from a strong atheist to somebody who believes in God. Was like every time saying the word God was so painful. Being around religious people was so painful. I fundraised, and when people are like, is this some sort of a church? And I'd be like, like I wanted to say no, but I had to be like, yes. And people were like, oh, I hate religion. I was like, so do I. No, I don't. Yes, I do. Like so painful, so painful. But it was based on the vision of who I want to be. So just so you know, it's not a comfortable experience. And sometimes it's actually a downright painful experience to change who you are. But that's the price you pay of losing your old self, shedding your old skin requires you sometimes to really get uncomfortable. And sometimes that can be physically
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
It's short-term pain for long-term gain,
Absolutely.
which is worth it. And sometimes that shedding skin takes a few minutes. Like the most transformative, the most healing points in people's lives are usually one conversation, usually with a spouse or parent, somebody that's really close to us. And those conversations are basically, it's essentially practicing the five virtues in one conversation, which can take 5-10 minutes, an hour. Like it's not that long. And then after that, the skin is shed, and then that's healing. That's recovery. Because people say time heals all, which is such a great fallacy that we've tricked ourselves to believing, right? If I just sit on this long enough, I'll stop watching porn. If I sit on this long enough, I'll stop needing XYZ dependency. But time just creates opportunity for healing. And depending on how we use our attention.
That's why, yeah, I was going to say, this kind of wraps it all up. It says, time doesn't heal all unless you change your attention. And then time plus attention does heal all.
And you can have a healing, because people ask this all the time in our world, High Noon, in our programs, like, am I healing? Am I recovering? We talk endlessly about the root cause, fix the root issue, right? And then you won't want to watch porn or masturbate. It's like, well, am I healing? That's the question. Because if you focus your attention on the healing of recovery, then it's like you'll wake up one day and you'll be like, man, I haven't thought about porn in months. What happened? For 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't thought about porn. What's going on? Well, you healed something in you when you had that conversation. Talking about this couple, right? With your wife and you shared that stuff, something healed in that moment. Maybe it took a day or a few days. But when she was like, you know what, I'm gonna choose to learn how to love you despite this, that's healing. That's it right there.
Yeah.
And then as a result, you'll have less shadows, obviously, less negativity towards yourself and probably towards her. And you'll have more light in God. And that's the equation for healing. It's like more light, less darkness, more positivity, less negativity. That's it. And you put more and more days like that together to the point where you can go months and months of just feeling cloud nine. Life is good, right?
Yeah. I think that does her. Thank you, Benji.
Cool.
So yeah, everybody, in summary, time plus attention equals whatever you want it to be. And if you are intentional with your attention, then you can use time to heal all wounds and to become and to create, to cultivate, to curate the exact life of your dreams. But it requires you to figure out what your dreams are. Then it requires you to use your time intentionally to put your attention on who that future self would be, right? And whether that's like, imagine how many people are like, oh, I'm an angry person. And so, no, that's just how you've trained your body to react to stressful situations. You can be a Zen person, and then not in a repressive way. And if you're a sad person, you could be a happy person. You could go from pessimistic to optimistic. You could be from sarcastic to sincere, introvert to extrovert. You can change everything. We have that capacity. We have the functions, and science is just proving that through neuroplasticity. You can upregulate things. Epigenetics is like upregulating. You have certain traits that you inherited, and you can choose which ones you want to accentuate and which ones you want to diminish based on where you put your attention. So we can customize our lives, but it requires time, attention, and intention. Those are the three main ingredients that there are for you to customize. And remember, the second part is first train your brain through repetition until your heart catches up. And when your brain and your heart both believe, then you'll start to see significant changes in your world. So that was a mouthful, and it was a brainful, but you guys got it. You gals got it. You can do this. Believe it. Believe it with all your heart and soul.
You can do it.
And we will see you next
You
week.
can do it. All right. See you.
Hey, did you know that our team wants to do more events? Well, if you want to bring the High Noon message to your community or group, then let us know and we'll try to work something out. There's a simple application that you can fill out right now at highnoon.org/invite. And one of our team members will get back to you to see what's possible. That's highnoon.org/invite. All right, see you in the next episode.